Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2019 Advanced. In this, the next few sections, we're going to look at customization. And in this first section, we're going to take a look at customization of tables. We've used tables extensively throughout the course so far, and I hope you're familiar with some of the basic operations that we've performed on tables, such as selecting the table to show at any point in time, and then also inserting and hiding columns. So let's start by looking at the process of selecting a table. If I click on the View tab, and from within the data group I have a Tables button, and if I click the bottom half I get a drop down, and you can see this menu is kind of divided into two. We have Custom and then we have Built-in. So Custom is showing tables that I've created, and then underneath we have a big long list of the built-in tables. Now bearing in mind that these aren't all of them, it's just a select few, the ones that you might most commonly use. For example, if you were trying to update progress, you might well use the tracking table. Now at any time for the selected table, you have the option here to reset to default, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. And you also have an option here to save the currently selected set of fields as a new table. And again, we'll be looking at that in just a moment. And right at the bottom, you have something that says More Tables. And what this does is it gives you a list of all of the available tables. And the tables are in two lists effectively: task tables and resource tables. Now you may or may not be familiar with the contents of all of these tables for tasks and resources, but some of them here, for instance the DA weekly update, are custom tables that I use on some projects. Now at any time if I want to apply a table other than the one that's currently applied, I can select it in the list here, such as DA weekly update, and click on Apply. And there we go. I'm going to make that a little bit wider. And that table is now applied. And it has a very specific set of columns that I have specified for that custom table. That table actually has 6 columns, including the ID column on the left. And what I want to do now is to look at the definition of this table. So I'm going to go back into the drop down. I'm going to go down to More Tables again. I'm going to find my DA weekly update, and this time I'm going to click on the Edit button. And now I can see the table definitions of this table. The heading on this dialog box is very important: table definition, and then we have the project name. Now the name of the table is DA weekly update. I could change that if I wanted to, and notice on the right here there is a checkbox, Show in Menu. At the moment that is not checked, so I'm going to check that now, and then I'm going to click on OK, and I'm going to click on Close, and there it is, DA weekly update. Now one thing you may have noticed there is that the other table names have one character underlined, and this is effectively the keyboard shortcut to apply that table. So in the case of usage, it's G; in the case of tracking, it's T; in the case of schedule, it's S, and so on. So if I go back into the definition of DA weekly update, I can set a unique letter there as its keyboard shortcut. So I don't think that Y is used anywhere else. So let's make the Y the keyboard shortcut to apply this table. So how I do that is I go into the name, and just before where we have the Y, I'm going to do an ampersand, and then click on OK. And what I'm going to do now is close that dialog, and let's bring up that menu again, and you can see now that the Y in DA weekly update is underlined, showing me that that's the shortcut key I can use to quickly apply that table. So let's now take a look at the DA weekly update table in detail. So let's go back in and let's select it in the list and click on Edit. Now note, apart from the name and the show menu options at the top there, we have some important options at the bottom. One of them is Lock First Column. Now the Lock First Column checkbox here, which is currently checked, means that the first column, in this case the ID column, is not scrolled if you scroll left to right in the table. So this makes it possible to keep track of the ID of the particular task that you're looking at. So you'll probably very often want to lock that first column. Note also that the first column doesn't have a header on when it's locked. The very last checkbox there, Show Add New Column Interface, determines whether or not you see the Add New Column column to the right-hand end of the columns in the table. So some people like that there, some of them don't. Of course, you can always do an insert column and change the sequence of the columns if you don't want to show that Add New Column interface. The middle option there is Auto Adjust Header Row Height. So depending on the length of the text in the header, you may or may not need the row height in the headers to be taller or shorter. And that can be auto adjusted if you check this option. Now in the main body of this dialog, you have effectively a sort of spreadsheet in this case with these 6 fields in it. And for each field, you specify the field name. So this is the name of the field in the definition in the case of a task. You can then specify how you want the data aligned. So note all of those are currently left aligned. You can specify the width of the columns in the table. So for instance, the ID column is 6 units wide and the name column is 36 units wide, and so on. The one thing I can immediately see here is that the ID column there is a bit too wide. And if you wanted to change any of these, you can simply click in them and you can adjust them as you see fit. Now, if you look at the next column, title, if it's blank, the title becomes the same as the field name. But if there's an entry there, the title that you've got in that column, in this case, for example, task name, replaces the field name. Now, since the field name is used in a couple of different situations, it's often a good idea when you're putting a title on a column to be specific about whether this is task name or resource name. And this title is specifically there for that purpose. You then have a column called Align Title, and that determines how the contents of the title are aligned in the table. Note currently that they're all center aligned. And then notice to the right of the Align Title column, you have header wrapping and text wrapping. And then you can see that for each of those, whether header wrapping is set to yes or text wrapping is set to yes. Just below that sort of spreadsheet of fields in the table definition, there's 2 other things. So first of all, you have date format. Do you want any dates displayed in a particular format? Well, this is currently set to default, and in fact, this particular table doesn't have any dates in it. But bear in mind that one might add a column, that's a date column, to this table as a sort of temporary customization. So it's worth being clear there whether you want to use the default date format or one of the other date formats that you can access from that drop down. And then we have row heights, and that is currently set to 2 units. And again, you can change the row height. So let me just show you what happens here if I change the row height to 3. And let's click on OK and apply. And you'll see that those rows have now got a little bit taller. So you've seen there how to make changes to the table definition using the table definition dialog. But almost all of those changes can be made without using the dialog if you'd prefer. Let me show you a couple of examples. Let's suppose I wanted to move the actual work column before the work column. So I'm going to move it by selecting it and dragging it left to position it before the work column. Now let me suppose also that I'm going to hide the RAG column. So I'm going to right click on the column header and select Hide Column. And if I wanted to insert a new column, so let's suppose I click on Work, right click and select Insert Column, and I'm going to choose, let's say Baseline Work. Now let's see what those changes look like in the table definition dialog. So we're going to go to Table, More Tables, DA Weekly Update, Edit. So as you can see, what's happened here is that the RAG column has gone. The actual work column was moved to the left of the work column. So that's moved up the spreadsheet in the central part, and the baseline work column has been introduced. If I wanted to pretty much do the opposite to that, all I need to do, for example, is to click on baseline work and delete the row. And I could delete that either by pressing my delete key, as I did just there, or we have a delete row button just above the table. I could also, for example, cut the actual work using the cut row button and put it back at the end using paste row. And then if I also wanted to put back the rag column, for example, I might want to put it just before percentage complete. I can select insert row and I can search for it that way. And again, if I needed to adjust the width of these, I could go in and I can make those required changes if I needed to. So just a couple of other things to point out here. You don't have to go back into the table definition dialog to change the properties of the individual columns in the chart here or rows in the table definition. If you right click in the header, so let's say of percentage complete, one of the options is field settings. And this gives you access to the field settings for that particular field. So you've got the field name, the title, and at the moment that's blank, so we'll just see the field name there, percent complete, and then we have title alignment currently center, and also data alignment currently set to left, and the width is 19. And I've also got a checkbox there to indicate whether the header text is wrapped or not. And you have an additional feature here in this little field settings dialog, which says best fit. If you click on best fit, it will work out the best fit for that particular field. So as I've just done there, it's worked it out and I have my best fit for that particular column. And perhaps the last thing to point out here, when you use the table definition dialog to define the row height, that row height is the default for all of the rows in the table. But you can change individual row heights if you want to. So if I wanted to change this particular row height, I can do that just by dragging it up and down and changing it. So you have a sort of manual intervention option as well. So I've shown you most of the key features about table definition in this section, but I want to talk to you about managing these table definitions, how you create them, how you move them around, how you delete them, and so on. Generally speaking, the management of custom table definitions. And that's what I'm going to cover in the next section, so please join me for that.